What would you choose? The telegram that promises freedom or the ring that promises chains? The school bell's final chime echoed across Silver Point just as Mercy Halstead dismissed her last student, watching 8-year-old Jimmy Kowalski race toward his father's assay office with his slate bouncing against his hip. October, wind pressed through the cracks around the schoolhouse door, carrying the bite of early winter down from the peaks. 23 years old and still teaching other people's children, the thought struck her like a physical weight. Miss Halstead. The voice belonged to Samuel Brennan, her stepbrother, whose shadow filled the doorway. At 35, he carried himself with the authority of a man who owned the largest silver claim in 3 counties. We need to talk, she continued, erasing the day's arithmetic from the blackboard, each stroke deliberate. School hours are finished. Sam, whatever business you have can wait until you're 23. He stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal thinning brown hair. Past time for a woman to marry. The chalk crumbled between her fingers. Their father's will had left her dependent on Sam's guardianship until marriage, a chain that grew heavier each year. I've had offers, from clerks and drifters. Sam's boots clicked against the wooden floor as he approached. I've arranged something better. Thomas Brennan, my brother from Colorado. He needs a wife. You need a husband. The papers are drawn. Mercy turned, her green eyes meeting his. You can't sell me like cattle. I can arrange your future. From his coat, he withdrew a folded document. Thomas runs a profitable lumber operation in the high country. Good man, steady provider. He placed the contract on her desk beside her lesson plans. The ceremony is set for Saturday. This Saturday? The words came out strangled. That's 4 days. Time enough to pack. Sam's tone carried no room for argument. The preacher will perform the service at 10 o'clock. Mrs. Chen at the Mercantile has your dress ready. I ordered it last week. Mercy stared at the contract, her father's signature witness line already filled in Sam's careful hand. Through the window, she watched the telegraph wires sway in the wind, carrying messages to places she'd never see. What if I refuse? Then you'll find yourself without roof or resources by Christmas. Sam replaced his hat. I've supported Father's charity long enough. After he left, Mercy sat at her desk as shadows lengthened across the empty classroom. The contract bore Thomas Brennan's signature bold strokes that suggested confidence, or perhaps desperation. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her teaching satchel alongside her worn copy of McGuffey's Reader. The walk home took her past Kowalski's assay office, where lamplight spilled golden onto the boardwalk. Through the window, she glimpsed immigrant families gathered around the scale, watching their week's dig wade into dollars and cents. At the Mercantile, her wedding dress hung in the window like a ghost of her future ivory silk, with pearl buttons she'd never chosen. Her boarding house room held few possessions. Teaching certificates, her mother's pearl earrings, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. She pulled out writing paper and began a letter. Dear Mrs. Patterson, I write to inquire about the teaching position advertised in the Denver Post. I am prepared to travel at my earliest convenience. Twilight pressed in, counting down the 3 days left. Dawn brought the sound of wagon wheels on frozen ground. Mercy peered through her window to see Thomas Brennan climbing down from a lumber wagon, his broad shoulders filling a wool coat that had seen mountain winters. Even from 2 stories up, she could see the deliberate way he moved. No wasted motion, like a man accustomed to working alone. She dressed quickly and descended to the boarding house kitchen, where Mrs. O'Brien was serving porridge to the other residents. Your intended's here, the landlady announced without looking up from her pot. Been asking directions to the schoolhouse. Mercy accepted a bowl with shaking hands. Through the kitchen window, she watched Thomas examine the wagon's axle with practiced attention. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, and when he straightened, she caught sight of a face marked by weather and solitude. Not handsome in any parlor sense, but compelling. Best not keep him waiting, Mrs. O'Brien advised. Mountain men don't favor towns for long. At the schoolhouse, Mercy found Thomas standing before the map of Colorado Territory, his finger tracing the high country where few settlements existed. He turned at her footstep, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. Miss Halstead. His voice carried the cadence of someone more comfortable with silence. I'm Thomas Brennan. Mr. Brennan. She set her satchel on the desk, the contract rustling inside. I suppose Sam told you about his arrangement. It did? Thomas removed his hat, revealing hair that needed cutting. Told me you were educated. Said you taught school. For 6 years. Mercy began arranging the day's lessons, grateful for familiar tasks. Since I was 17. That's good. He studied the primers stacked on her desk. Children need learning, even in the high country. Something in his tone made her look up. There are children where you live? Scattered homesteads. Mining camps. Thomas ran his fingers along the spine of a geography book. No proper school for 50 miles. And you think I'd continue teaching? Figure that's up to you. He met her eyes directly. I need a wife, not a decoration. Before she could respond, the door opened to admit her first student, Mary Kowalski, carrying her lunch pail and slate. The 8-year-old stopped short at the sight of Thomas, her eyes wide. Good morning, Mary. Mercy's voice steadied automatically. This is Mr. Brennan. He's visiting from the mountains. Are you a real mountain man? Mary approached without fear, typical of children raised in mining camps. I cut timber up high. Thomas crouched to her level. Build cabins and mills. Do you have a bear? Bears have themselves. I just share the mountain with them. Mary giggled and skipped to her desk as other children began arriving. Thomas stepped back against the wall, watching Mercy lead the morning recitation. When Jimmy Kowalski struggled with his multiplication tables, Thomas quietly moved forward. Think of it like ore samples, he suggested to the boy. 3 samples of 4 nuggets each. How many nuggets total? Jimmy's face lit up with understanding. 12! As the morning progressed, Thomas remained silent but attentive, observing how Mercy managed 8 children of varying ages and abilities. During recess, he helped repair a loose board on the steps while she watched from the doorway. You're good with children, she said when they returned inside. Had younger brothers once. His expression closed slightly. Before the war, the lunch bell from the mine gave them privacy as students scattered home for their midday meal. Thomas approached her desk, where the contract lay partially visible beneath her lesson plans. Sam says the wedding's Saturday. Sam says many things. Mercy's hands trembled as she straightened papers. He doesn't ask what I want. What do you want? The question hung in the air like smoke from the distant mines. Through the window, Mercy could see the telegraph office where her inquiry to Denver waited. She could also see the mercantile where her wedding dress hung, price paid, future sealed. I want to teach, she said finally. I want to matter. Thomas nodded slowly. Mountain needs a teacher. Question is whether you can live that high. How high? 8,000 feet. Snow from October to May. Nearest neighbor 5 miles down a trail that washouts regular. He paused. Gets lonely. Mercy looked at the map where his finger had traced the high country. Lonelier than here? Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a recognition. Maybe not. The afternoon bell interrupted their conversation as children returned, and Thomas quietly took his leave. As Mercy resumed lessons, she found herself glancing toward the window, watching his lumber wagon disappear up the mountain road. That evening, she walked to the telegraph office where old Pete Morrison was closing up shop. Need to send another wire, miss? Mercy fingered the coins in her pocket, her last $1.65. Number cancel. The one to Denver. You sure? Already paid for. I'm sure. She walked home through gathering dusk, past the mercantile where her wedding dress caught lamplight like captured moonbeams. Tomorrow would bring Friday, then Saturday, then a life she couldn't yet imagine. Friday morning arrived with the season's first snow, fat flakes that clung to windows and made the boardwalk treacherous. Mercy woke before dawn to the sound of Mrs. O'Brien stoking the kitchen fire, and when she descended for breakfast, she found Thomas already seated at the worn table, steam rising from his coffee cup. Morning. He stood as she entered, a courtesy that seemed natural rather than calculated. You're up early. Mercy accepted coffee from Mrs. O'Brien, grateful for its warmth. Habit. Thomas resumed his seat. Sun rises the same time up high, but you feel it later through the trees. Mrs. O'Brien set a plate of eggs and bacon before each of them. Figured you two should share a proper meal before tomorrow's doings. Mercy cut her eggs with careful precision, aware of Thomas watching her. Have you given thought to what happens after the ceremony? Some. He stirred sugar into his coffee, 2 spoonfuls, she noted. Figure we'll head up the mountains Saturday afternoon, get you settled before the next storm. And my teaching? Told you that's your choice. Thomas met her eyes. Got a cabin near Clearwater Creek. 1 room for now, but I can add on come spring. There's families scattered through the valley, maybe 20 children who never seen a proper schoolhouse. Through the window, Mercy watched early shopkeepers sweeping snow from their stoops. Silver Point was waking to another day of silver scales and supply inventories, of measured lives contained within valley walls. 20 children, she repeated, give or take. The Hendersons have 4. Schwartz family has 3 more. There's a widow woman with twins, and the mining camp has maybe a dozen youngsters. Thomas pushed back from the table. Course, winter limits travel. You teach in the cabin until spring. The image formed in her mind. Children gathered around a rough table, mountain light slanting through hand. Built windows, lessons shaped by seasons and necessity rather than district requirements. What about supplies? Books? Make a supply run to Colorado Springs twice a year. Could order whatever you need. Thomas stood, leaving money for Mrs. O'Brien. Got business at the mill today. Needed to arrange timber delivery for spring building. After he left, Mercy sat alone with her cooling coffee. Mrs. O'Brien bustled around the kitchen, occasionally glancing her way. Nervous, dear? Terrified, Mercy admitted. Natural enough. Marriage is a leap for any woman, let alone one heading to the high country. The landlady wiped her hands on her apron. What's your sense of him? Mercy considered the question. He seems solid, honest. Quiet men often are. It's the talkers you want to watch. Mrs. O'Brien poured herself coffee and sat across from Mercy. I've known mountain men to come down for supplies. They're different from valley folk, harder in some ways, gentler in others. Land shapes them. Sam says it's a good match. Sam says it's profitable. Not always the same thing. Mrs. O'Brien stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Question is what you say. At the schoolhouse, Mercy found her students buzzing with excitement about tomorrow's wedding. Mary Kowalski had picked wildflowers despite the snow, and Jimmy had carved MB into his slate frame. Will you still be our teacher? Mary asked during morning recess. I'll be living in the mountains after tomorrow, Mercy explained. There are children there who need lessons too. But who'll teach us? The question struck deeper than Mercy expected. These children had become her purpose over 6 years. Their growth, her measure of worth. Leaving them felt like abandoning a trust. The school board will find someone, she said, hoping it was true. The day passed in a blur of final lessons and tearful goodbyes. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Mercy packed her few teaching supplies, McGuffey's readers, slate boards, a small bell for calling attention. Whatever came next, she would be ready. That evening, she walked to the mercantile, where Mrs. Chen was preparing to close shop. Come for final fitting? The Chinese woman asked in careful English. The gown clung cold and unfamiliar, a stranger's promise stitched in silk, a waist that emphasized her figure without impropriety. In the mirror, Mercy saw a stranger, a woman ready for marriage, for mountain life, for whatever tomorrow demanded. Beautiful, Mrs. Chen pronounced. You make good mountain wife. How do you know? Eyes. You have eyes that see far. Mrs. Chen wrapped the dress carefully in tissue paper. Mountain needs eyes like that. Walking back to the boarding house, Mercy passed the church where Reverend Matthews was lighting lamps for evening service. Tomorrow, those same lamps would illuminate her wedding, transforming her from Mercy Halstead to Mrs. Thomas Brennan in the space of spoken vows. She found a letter waiting on her dresser, her teaching certificate, and a recommendation from the school board, both signed and sealed. Even if the Denver opportunity had passed, these papers represented 6 years of purpose and achievement. Outside her window, snow continued falling, each flake adding weight to the growing silence that would soon define her world. She folded her teaching documents carefully and placed them in her traveling trunk alongside her mother's pearls and her father's watch. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. Saturday dawned clear and cold. The overnight snow transformed into crystal that caught early sunlight like scattered diamonds. Mercy woke to the sound of church bells, calling the faithful to witness her transformation from schoolteacher to mountain wife. Mrs. O'Brien appeared with breakfast on a tray, eggs she couldn't eat, coffee that tasted like anxiety. "Big day," the landlady announced unnecessarily. "Your husband to be stopped by earlier. Said he'd be at the church by 9:30. Mercy's stomach lurched. My husband to be. Getting used to the sound of it. Are we? Mrs. O'Brien laid out the ivory silk dress with its pearl buttons. I pressed it fresh this morning. You'll be the prettiest bride Silverpoint's seen in years. At 9 o'clock, Mercy stood before her mirror in full wedding regalia, her mother's pearl earrings catching light from the window. The woman in the glass looked composed, even elegant, but her hands shook as she adjusted her veil. A knock at the door announced Sam's arrival. "Time to go, sister." The walk to church felt like a journey through someone else's dream. Townspeople gathered on the boardwalk to watch Mrs. Kowalski with tears in her eyes, Pete Morrison closing the telegraph office to attend, even the Mexican workers from the mine standing respectfully silent. Inside the small church, Mercy counted maybe 30 witnesses scattered among the wooden pews. Thomas stood at the altar with Reverend Matthews, wearing a clean white shirt and dark suit that emphasized his mountain-hardened frame. When she appeared in the doorway, his storm-gray eyes found hers and held them. Sam walked her down the short aisle, his grip on her arm firm but not unkind. "You'll do fine," he whispered as they reached the altar. "Thomas is a good man." Then she stood beside this stranger who would become her husband, listening to Reverend Matthews recite words that had bound countless couples before them. "Do you, Thomas Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice carried clearly through the small church. "And do you, Mercy Halstead, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The moment stretched like a held breath. Through the church window, Mercy could see the schoolhouse where her old life waited, empty now of purpose. She could see the mountains where her new life beckoned, unknown but somehow necessary. "I do." Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her the night before, saved through war and westward migration. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her gently, a gesture more promise than passion. The congregation erupted in applause and well wishes. "Mrs." Kowalski pressed forward with tears streaming. Jimmy tugged on Mercy's dress to wish her luck, and Pete Morrison shook Thomas's hand with mining camp enthusiasm. But it was Mary Kowalski who nearly broke her composure, presenting a small bouquet of late wildflowers tied with ribbon from her mother's sewing box. "For remembering us," the 8-year-old whispered. "I could never forget you." Mercy whispered back, meaning it completely. The reception at the boarding house featured Mrs. O'Brien's best cooking and talk that gradually shifted from wedding congratulations to practical advice for mountain living. Thomas accepted good wishes with polite dignity, but Mercy noticed how he kept glancing toward the window where his loaded lumber wagon waited. At 2 o'clock, he approached her with gentle determination. "Time to head up the mountain. Weather's clear now, but that could change." Mercy hugged each of her students one final time, promised Mrs. O'Brien she'd write regularly, and accepted Sam's stiff embrace with the best grace she could manage. Her trunk and teaching supplies were already loaded in the wagon, her old life packed away in lumber and leather. As Thomas helped her onto the wagon seat, Mercy looked back at Silver Point, spread below the school where she'd taught for 6 years, the boarding house where she'd lived in careful solitude, the church where she'd just pledged her future to uncertainty. "Ready?" Thomas asked, taking up the reins. "As he'll ever be." The wagon lurched into motion, carrying them away from the only world Mercy had known toward mountain peaks that rose like promises against the October sky. The valley clocked the hour in shadows as they left. As they climbed the winding mountain road, Mercy felt the weight of her new gold ring and the lighter burden of possibility. Whatever lay ahead in the high country, she would meet it as Thomas Brennan's wife, teacher, partner, and perhaps, in time, something more. The wind turned, carrying the scent of pine and snow and fresh beginnings. The mountain road tested every joint in the lumber wagon as they climbed beyond the tree line, each switchback revealing broader views of the valley below and narrower margins for error. Thomas handled the reins with casual expertise, but Mercy noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the sky, where clouds gathered like grey promises. Storm coming, he observed as they paused to rest the horses beside a creek that ran swift and cold from snowmelt. "We'll make the cabin before it hits, but it'll be close." Mercy climbed down to stretch her legs, her wedding dress impractical for mountain travel. The air at this altitude bit through silk and pearl buttons, reminding her that vanity had no place in the high country. "How much farther?" she asked, accepting a drink from Thomas's canteen. 5 miles. Maybe 6. He watered the horses while studying the approaching clouds. "Trail gets rough from here." They pressed on through stands of aspen and pine, the path barely wide enough for the wagon. At 7,000 feet, snow appeared in shaded pockets, and the wind carried bite that promised a hard freeze. Mercy pulled her traveling cloak tighter, grateful for wool over silk. "There," Thomas said finally, pointing through the trees. The cabin sat in a small clearing beside Clearwater Creek, chinked logs weathered silver-gray by mountain seasons. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had been maintaining the fire in their absence. A small barn stood nearby, and beyond it, stacks of cut timber suggested the lumber operation that supported this isolated life. "It's smaller than I expected," Mercy said, then immediately regretted the observation. "Big enough for now." Thomas swung down from the wagon seat. "I'll add on come spring." As he unloaded her trunk, the cabin door opened to reveal an elderly man with a grizzled beard and clothes that had seen multiple seasons. "About time," the man called. "Storm's been building all day. Mercy, this is Joe Hendricks. Watches the place when I'm away." Thomas hefted her trunk easily. "Joe, meet my wife." Joe touched his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, welcome to the high country." Inside, the cabin revealed itself as one large room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a hand pump for water, and a sleeping loft reached by ladder. The furniture was handmade but solid table, chairs, a rocking chair beside the fire. Shelves held books, tools, and supplies for long winters. "Got the fire built up good," Joe reported. "Beans are cooking, coffee's hot. Figure you'd be hungry after the journey." As if summoned by his words, snow began pattering against the windows, first tentative flakes, then a steady fall that promised to last through the night. "Just in time," Thomas observed, settling Mercy's trunk beside the bed. "Thanks for watching things, Joe." The older man gathered his coat and hat. "Best head to my place before this gets serious. You newlyweds take care." After Joe left, Mercy found herself alone with her husband in the cabin that would be her world for the foreseeable future. The fire crackled cheerfully, the coffee smelled welcome, and snow continued accumulating outside like nature's blessing on their union. "Hungry?" Thomas asked, stirring the pot of beans. "Starving." She hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous about the ceremony to manage wedding cake. They ate in companionable quiet, the simple meal somehow more satisfying than any formal dinner. Outside, wind whistled through the pines, and snow thickened until the windows showed nothing but white. "First mountain blizzard," Thomas explained. "Could last 3 days." Mercy looked around the cabin with new understanding. This single room would contain their entire shared existence until the storm passed. No privacy, no escape, no buffer between two strangers who'd pledged their lives to each other that morning. "I brought teaching supplies," she said, suddenly nervous. "Good. Children up here need learning." Thomas poured more coffee. "Henderson Place has 4 youngsters ages 6 to 14. They're bright kids, just never had formal schooling. What about books?" "Some. I order what I can from Colorado Springs." He gestured toward the shelves. "Got McGuffey's readers, arithmetic primers, even some poetry. Mercy examined the collection, surprised by its range. Beside practical volumes on farming and carpentry, she found Longfellow, Shakespeare, and a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. "You're a reader," she observed. "Long winters. Books help pass the time." Thomas banked the fire for the night. "Storm like this, we might get through several." The implications settled over her like the accumulating snow outside. 3 days alone with this man she barely knew, in a space smaller than her boarding house room, with nothing but books and conversation to bridge the gap between strangers and spouses. "I'll take the floor tonight," Thomas said quietly. "Give you time to settle in." "That's not necessary." The words came out too quickly. "We're married now." He studied her face in the firelight. "Marriage is legal, Mercy. Everything else takes time." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment. "Thank you." As she changed into a nightgown behind a quilt he'd hung for privacy, Mercy listened to Thomas moving around the cabin, checking windows, adding wood to the fire, setting coffee to brew for morning. Ordinary sounds of domestic life that felt strange and somehow comforting. When she emerged, he'd made a bed on the floor near the fire, leaving the loft and its proper bed for her use. "Sleep well," he said simply. "Good night, Thomas." She climbed to the loft and lay beneath quilts that smelled of pine and mountain air, listening to wind howl around their small shelter. Below, she could hear Thomas settling into his makeshift bed, the crackle of logs settling in the fireplace, the whisper of snow against glass. Her wedding ring caught firelight from below, gold gleaming against her finger, like a promise she was just beginning to understand. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, sealing them into their mountain world until weather decided to release them. But inside their cabin, warmth held against the cold, and two strangers began the long work of becoming something more. Mercy woke to absolute silence, the peculiar quiet that follows a heavy snowfall. Pale light filtering through the windows suggested late morning, though the thick glass made it impossible to judge the storm's progress. Below in the main room, she could hear Thomas moving around the kitchen area. She dressed quickly in wool and flannel, her silk wedding dress carefully folded away for some distant future occasion. The ladder from the loft creaked under her weight, announcing her descent. "Morning." Thomas greeted her without looking up from the stove, where eggs sizzled in a cast-iron pan. Silence after the fury snow stacked to the windowsills. Through the windows, Mercy saw a transformed world. Snow had buried the clearing in drifts that reached the cabin's windowsills, and the trees stood like white monuments against a sky, so blue it hurt to look at directly. "How deep?" she asked, accepting coffee from him. 3 feet, maybe 4 in the drifts. Thomas plated eggs alongside bacon and fried bread. "We're snowed in proper for a few days." The prospect should have alarmed her, but instead Mercy felt an odd sense of peace. The decision was made. The die cast. Whatever happened between them would happen in this snow-sealed world, without interference or escape. After breakfast, Thomas showed her around their limited domain. The main room served multiple purposes: kitchen, parlor, study, and workshop. His tools hung neat and clean on the walls, and a workbench near the window held partially completed projects. "What are you making?" Mercy examined a half-carved piece that might become a chair. "Furniture. Mostly for trade down in Silver Point, but some for here." He ran his fingers along the smooth wood. "Figured we'd need more than one chair come spring." The comment held implications about their future that neither addressed directly. Instead, Mercy explored the cabin's corners, discovering details that revealed Thomas's character. Hand-sewn curtains suggested domestic skills unusual in a bachelor. The books were well-read but carefully maintained. Even his few personal possessions, a tintype of what might be family, a watch worn smooth by years of handling, were arranged with precise care. "Tell me about your family," she said, settling into the single chair while he returned to his carving. "Not much to tell." Thomas's knife moved steadily along the wood. "Parents died in the cholera outbreak of '62. Had 2 younger brothers who went to war. Neither came home. I'm sorry. Long time passed." He paused in his work. "What about yours? Besides Sam, I mean." My mother died when I was 12. Father remarried Sam's mother, but she only lived 2 years after the wedding. Mercy drew her knees up, watching Thomas work. Father tried to manage both his children and his grief. I think we all failed at it. That why you became a teacher? The question surprised her with its perception. Children made sense to me. They needed things I could provide: lessons, attention, encouragement. It felt purposeful. Still is purposeful. Thomas looked up from his carving. Just different children now. Through the afternoon, they fell into an easy rhythm. Thomas worked on his furniture while Mercy explored his book collection, occasionally reading passages aloud when something struck her as particularly beautiful or amusing. The fire crackled between them, and snow continued its soft assault on the windows. As evening approached, Thomas prepared supper: venison stew with root vegetables from his cellar, bread baked in a Dutch oven, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. You cook well for a bachelor, Mercy observed. Had to learn or starve? He ladled stew into bowls. Mountain doesn't care if you're handy in the kitchen. Will you teach me mountain cooking? If you want to learn. They ate by firelight, snow reflecting pale luminescence through the windows. The cabin felt smaller in the evening darkness, their shared space intimate without being uncomfortable. Mercy. Thomas set down his coffee cup. About last night. You don't need to explain. Heat rose in her cheeks. I understand we barely know each other. That's not. He searched for words. I want you to feel safe here. This is your home now, not just mine. Whatever happens between us should happen because you want it, not because law says you belong to me. The statement hung in the warm air between them, revolutionary in its implications. Mercy had never heard a man speak of marriage as partnership rather than ownership. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For treating me like a person instead of property. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, pain, perhaps, or recognition. Had a mother once. Wouldn't want any woman to feel the way Pa sometimes made her feel. Your father was difficult? Hard man, harder after the war. Thomas poked at the fire with an iron rod. Ma used to say marriage should be a refuge, not a prison. Took me years to understand what she meant. Outside, wind rose again, promising another night of mountain fury. But inside their small sanctuary, Mercy felt safer than she had in years. Not because of the sturdy walls or warm fire, but because of the man who sat across from her, honorable, gentle, and committed to giving their strange union time to become something real. Would you read to me? She asked impulsively. Thomas selected a volume from his shelves, Longfellow's poems, and read in his quiet voice while snow whispered against glass and fire, painted dancing shadows on the walls. Mercy closed her eyes and listened, letting his voice weave stories of distant shores and faithful hearts. When he finished, they prepared for another night of careful propriety, he on the floor by the fire, she in the loft above. But as Mercy settled beneath her quilts, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow's conversation, to learning more about this man who carved furniture with such patience and spoke of marriage with such unexpected wisdom. Outside, the storm raged on, holding them in its white embrace while two careful hearts began their tentative dance towards something that might, given time and kindness, become love. The third day of their snow imprisonment dawned brilliant and still. Mercy woke to the sound of Thomas chopping wood outside, rhythmic strikes that echoed off the surrounding peaks. Through the frost-etched window, she watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced even in snow that reached his knees. She dressed and descended to find coffee already brewing and breakfast waiting. The domestic routine felt natural now, as if they'd been sharing these mountain mornings for years instead of days. Roads should be passable by afternoon, Thomas reported as she joined him at the table. Snow's settled enough for the horses to manage. Are we going somewhere? Disappointment colored her voice before she could stop it. Henderson Place. They'll want to meet their children's new teacher. Thomas smiled at her expression. Don't worry, we'll be back before dark. After breakfast, they prepared for the journey. Thomas hitched the horses to a smaller sleigh kept for winter travel, while Mercy packed teaching supplies and wondered what mountain families would make of a city-trained schoolteacher. Nervous? Thomas asked as they set out through the snow-muffled forest. Terrified, Mercy admitted. What if they don't think I'm suitable? Then they'd be fools. His matter-of-fact tone steadied her nerves. Children need learning more than parents need opinions. The Henderson homestead sat in a valley 5 miles from their cabin, reached by a trail that wound between stands of evergreen, heavy with snow. Smoke rose from the chimney, and chickens pecked at scattered grain in a yard protected by windbreaks. Before they reached the door, it burst open to reveal 4 children, ranging from perhaps 6 to 14, all blonde, all curious, all staring at Mercy with unguarded interest. "Ma! Pa! The teacher's here!" shouted the oldest, a boy whose voice cracked between childhood and adolescence. Their parents emerged more slowly, a woman in her 30s with flour-dusted apron and a man whose calloused hands suggested hard work and honest living. "Mrs. Brennan," the woman said, wiping her hands before extending one in greeting. "I'm Sarah Henderson, and this is my husband Paul. We're so pleased you've come. Please, call me Mercy." She shook hands with both parents, noting the genuine warmth in their faces. "Thomas tells me you have children who'd like to learn. Want to? They're desperate for it." Paul Henderson's voice carried the slight accent of German immigrants. "Been teaching them what we can, but Sarah and I only got through 4th grade ourselves." The children pressed forward with eager questions. Could she teach them to read like grown-ups? Did she know about geography and faraway places? Would there be arithmetic harder than what Pa used for figuring lumber orders? "Slow down." Sarah laughed. Let the poor woman catch her breath. Inside the log house, Mercy found herself surrounded by the warm chaos of family life. Baby clothes hung drying near the fire, an infant slept in a wooden cradle, and the children clustered around the kitchen table where their few books lay open to various lessons. "Show me what you've been studying," Mercy suggested. For the next hour, she assessed their abilities while Thomas and Paul discussed lumber prices and spring-building plans. The oldest boy, Hans, read at nearly an adult level but struggled with written composition. 10-year-old Greta excelled at arithmetic but had never seen a proper geography book. The 2 younger ones, Carl and Liesel, knew their letters but needed guidance in forming words into sentences. "They're bright children," Mercy told Sarah as they prepared dinner together. "With proper instruction, they could achieve remarkable things. That's what we hoped." Sarah stirred a pot of soup that smelled of herbs and contentment. "It's hard, being so far from town. We want our children to have chances we never had. When would you like lessons to begin?" "Soon as you're willing. Paul can build sleds for the little ones, and Hans could help them get to your place 3 times a week." The possibility excited Mercy more than she'd expected. These children wanted to learn. Their parents supported education, and the challenge of mountain schooling appealed to her pioneering spirit. "What about payment?" she asked. "I can't charge what I did in Silver Point. We talked about that with your husband." Paul joined the conversation. "Figured we'd pay in goods, vegetables from our garden, eggs from our chickens, help with cabin work when you need it. Other families feel the same way." "Other families?" "The Schwartz place has 3 children, Widow Peterson has her twins, and there's maybe 8 or 10 youngsters in the mining camp up Willow Creek." Sarah counted on her fingers. 20 children, give or take. 20 children who hungered for knowledge in a land that demanded everything of its inhabitants. The prospect thrilled and terrified Mercy in equal measure. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Thomas suggested they should head home before the mountain cold deepened. The children extracted promises about when lessons would start Monday, if weather permitted, and their parents pressed a sack of root vegetables and a dozen eggs into Mercy's hands. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said as they prepared to leave. "You've given us hope." The sleigh ride home passed in comfortable silence, both lost in thought as twilight painted the snow-covered peaks purple and gold. At their cabin, Thomas helped her down from the sleigh with hands that lingered a moment longer than necessary. "You did well today," he said as they carried her teaching supplies inside. "I enjoyed it." Mercy hung up her cloak, then turned to face him. "Thomas, about our sleeping arrangements." He froze in the act of banking the fire. "What about them? We're married." The words came out in a rush. And today, meeting the Hendersons, seeing how they lived together, it made me think about what we could become. Thomas straightened slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that tonight, if you're willing, I'd like to share the bed in the loft instead of sending you to the floor." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of settling logs and the whisper of wind around their mountain refuge. "Are you certain?" His voice was carefully neutral. "There's no rush, Mercy. No obligation. I know." She met his eyes directly. "But there's also no point in pretending we're strangers when we're not. Not anymore." Something warm and cautious flickered in his storm-grey eyes. "Then yes, I'd like that very much." That night, they climbed to the loft together for the first time as true husband and wife. What passed between them was gentle and sweet, and entirely private, a beginning rather than a conclusion, a promise of deeper intimacy to come. Afterward, Mercy lay beside Thomas in the narrow bed, listening to his quiet breathing and the eternal whisper of mountain wind. Her new gold ring caught starlight from the window, and outside their warm sanctuary, snow continued its patient work of transforming the world. She thought of the children who would soon fill their cabin with voices and questions, of the life she and Thomas were building, one careful day at a time, of the way love could grow in the most unexpected places when nurtured with patience and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lesson planning, supply gathering, the endless negotiations of marriage in a harsh land. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In the arms of a good man, in a home they were making together, high in the mountains where the air was thin and the possibilities endless. The wind turned again, carrying promises of spring still months away but certain as sunrise. Mercy Brennan, no longer Halstead, closed her eyes and let mountain dreams carry her toward whatever tomorrow would bring. 6 months later, the June morning burst with mountain summer wildflowers carpeting meadows that had been buried under snow just weeks before, and sunshine warm enough to make the schoolchildren fidget in their seats as Mercy reviewed the day's geography lesson. "Can anyone tell me the capital of California?" she asked. The 15 young faces gathered around the expanded table Thomas had built that spring. Hans Henderson's hand shot up. "Sacramento, Mrs. Brennan." "Excellent. And who can show me where California is on our map?" Little Liesel scrambled to the wall map, a gift from the school board in Silver Point, and pointed with pride to the Western Territory. "Very good." Mercy glanced at the clock Thomas had carved from pine. "That's enough for today. Remember, we'll be practicing penmanship tomorrow, so bring your best handwriting." The children scattered like released birds, some heading home to distant homesteads, others lingering to help Mercy organize supplies for the next day's lessons. Through the open cabin door, she could see Thomas working at his outdoor workbench, building a proper schoolhouse that would be ready by autumn. "Mrs. Brennan?" Mary Kowalski, who had convinced her parents to let her spend the summer with her aunt in the mountains, appeared at Mercy's elbow. "Ma sent this for you." The letter bore the Silver Point postmark and Mrs. Kowalski's careful handwriting. Inside, Mercy found news from her old world. Jimmy was excelling in his new school, Pete Morrison had married the widow Thompson, and Sam had taken a position with a mining company in Denver. "We all miss you, Mrs." Kowalski had written, "but we hear wonderful things about your mountain school. The children are fortunate to have such a dedicated teacher." "Good news?" Thomas asked, joining her as the last student departed. "News from Silver Point." Mercy folded the letter carefully. "Everyone's well. Do you miss it?" Mercy considered the question, looking around their cabin that had become a one-room schoolhouse by day and a cozy home by night. The loft now held a proper bed and Thomas's reading chair, while the main room accommodated benches, blackboards, and shelves full of books ordered from Colorado Springs. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not the way I expected to." "What do you mean?" "I miss the children I taught there, but I love the children I teach here more. Does that make sense?" Thomas smiled, the expression that had become as familiar as his morning coffee ritual. "Perfect sense. This is your place now." "Our place," she corrected, rising to meet him. "How's the schoolhouse coming?" "Should have the roof finished by August." He gestured toward the half-built structure that would give them proper space for the growing number of students. "Joe Henderson's bringing lumber tomorrow, and the Schwartz boys promised to help with the chinking." The mountain community had embraced both education and their teacher with enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed Mercy. Parents paid in produce, labor, and heartfelt gratitude. Children arrived eager to learn, despite weather that would have closed valley schools for weeks. "Thomas," Mercy said as they prepared their simple supper, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from slicing bread, alerted by her tone. "What is it?" "I'm with child." The knife stilled in his hands. "Are you certain?" "As certain as a woman can be." Mercy touched her still flat stomach. "Sarah Henderson says all the signs are there." Thomas set down the knife and crossed to her in 2 quick strides, gathering her into his arms with a care that brought tears to her eyes. "How do you feel about it?" he asked against her hair, terrified. "Excited, grateful." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Happy. Good." He kissed her forehead, then her lips. "Because I feel the same way." That night, they sat on their small porch watching stars emerge over peaks that no longer seemed forbidding but protective. Thomas's hand rested on Mercy's stomach where their child grew, and she covered it with her own. "Will you keep teaching?" he asked. "For as long as I can. The mountain needs its school." Mercy leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, what better way to raise a child than surrounded by learning? Our child will be lucky." "Our children," Mercy corrected with a smile. "I have a feeling this baby won't be an only child for long." Thomas laughed, the sound echoing off their mountain walls like a blessing. "God help us, if they're all as stubborn as their mother, or as quietly determined as their father." As night deepened around their small home, Mercy reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been a spinster schoolteacher, facing an uncertain future. Tonight, she was a married woman carrying her first child, surrounded by students who adored her and neighbors who'd become family. The wind that had once seemed threatening now sang lullabies through the pines. Her stepbrother's desperate arrangement had become the greatest blessing of her life, and the mountain man who'd seemed like exile had become home itself. "Mercy?" Thomas's voice was drowsy with contentment. "What are you thinking about?" She considered all the possible answers: their growing family, her expanding school, the community they'd built together in this high, harsh, beautiful place. "I'm thinking," she said finally, "that sometimes the best paths are the ones we never meant to take." Thomas squeezed her hand, his wedding ring warm against her palm. "Good thing you took this one." "Good thing the wind turned," she agreed, and settled deeper into his arms as their mountain world whispered its ancient songs of patience, endurance, and love that grew slowly but lasted forever. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its mate across the high meadows where their children would play and learn and grow into whatever the mountain made them. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.